So then, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yeah. Yes. So perhaps I can begin with the formal reading. So as we just did the refuge and bodhichitta, this verse before engaging in any activity, positive activity, virtuous activity, it is always good to do that with this mind of generating faith, generating confidence in the three jewels, and then generating the awakening mind, So with these two minds, with these two thoughts as the basis, then this is how we engage in our this is how one should engage in our Dharma practice. Okay, so lojong dendima, the formal reading. Okay. Tewa chenpo lojong dendime zawa shu sos. Tangbo ngonjo thala lak chena minam dabu sam magi rikbe shila je nyambu nijang rangsa zhu. Ngowo gyunshi nangla sha tunzum gyume givu cha tongli nipo bemar jang tenyi lungla jombar cha. Yusum tusum gyaga jönam gyundu tsiki jang. Lembe korim rangne tsam nuju dikbe kangwe tse gengen changju lamdo jur. Lelen tamji jigrata gyunla gadin chewar gom. Tunam kushir gombayi toni sungwa laname joro shiden tabgi cho tela kangdu gomdu jar. Menga nyingbu dordyoba tongwa tala jarwa cha. Tijin poye damwani tongwa nyin jönam je. Chugun gyalpa chigdu duyo bangbu nyingi zowar song ide bashi gyundu de yangjang tumlan jongba yin. Jidun sumla dawdu lab dunpo jula rangsur sha. Yanla nyambar jo mecha shencho kanya mesamo. Nyumong kangchi ngayla jang dibi rewa tamje bang. Tujingi sehe bang, shung sangpo ma den, shangyo ma gyu, tang ma gu, nyenla mebo, zoke langla mejo. Jogi ze medu, tolo mecha, la dudu mebo. Gigi yanla du ma su. Nenjura tamji jigi cha, lonyon tamji jigi cha, tongda nila chawani, nipo kangjung suebar cha, nipo sodang dela sung, kawa sumla labar cha, juyu zo namsum lang, nyamba meba namsum gom, deme sumdang dembar cha, yula chome tato jong, kyabdang tingjong gyunla che, gyowa namla tato gom, genshen tala dwe me cha, tari zo nyamso lang, kolo me cha, renjo me cha, techo do jang, doju nigi tarwa cha, yu magum, golong madum, yu zambar mecha, horchi madu, nyingwa ngabu doa de changju lamdu juroyi, mengan duzi nyingbu di seling bani gyubayi, nganjang legi chosewe rangi meba mawi gyu, dungen tangyen kese ne dangzin duwe dangwa shu, tani shiya mejo tos. Okay, so that was the formal reading of the 7-point mind training, and then in the fourth point, the presentation of a lifetime's practice in summary is then applying ourselves to the practice of the 5 powers. So beginning with the power of propelling intention. and then with the power of acquaintance, and then with the power of positive seeds, and then the power of eradication, and then finally with the power of aspirational prayer, right? So these five are the essence, are the essence of our practice, of the mind training practice, right? So this I find very useful to always use as a reference point, Sometimes when we look in these texts, they touch on so many different points, right? And if one is not well versed, then it may be difficult to focus or to lose track. There is the likelihood that we might become a little lost in all these subtle, in all the nuances. One may become a little lost, right? So it is always good to have reference points, and these five powers I find very useful, right? So beginning with the first power, right? The power of propelling intention, right? And this is of course setting up the motivation, developing the correct motivation, the intention, the right intention. This is very important. So, for example, as it is taught, when we rise up, then to think, to think in this way, that in a way to pledge ourselves to the practice of the two awakening minds, to think, today I will, as much as I can, I will practice the two bodhichittas, I will practice the practice, I will put into practice the two awakening minds, making this pledge to yourself, this is what the propelling intention is about, it's about making, it's about pledging oneself to a cause. And what is the cause? The cause, our cause, as followers of the Bodhisattva yana, is of course to not become distracted from following the path of the Buddha, to not waver from the intent of the Buddha, to not become distracted from the aspiration of the Bodhisattvas, to follow in their example. So this we can use our aspiration to propel our practice, right? Or simply we can just think about how others are suffering just as we are, and by contemplating how others are suffering in different ways, in so many different ways, then naturally we want to do something about it, right? We want to do something about it. But right now, if you think about it, let alone on the benefit of all sentient beings, even for one sentient being, can we really extinguish, can we really eradicate their suffering, the suffering of even one sentient being? Of course, this is unrealistic at this point, right? So then we have to think, well, why is that the case? Well, because right now I myself don't have this capacity because of obstacles, because of obstacles in my mind, because of obstructive thoughts in my mind. Therefore, I have to free myself from all these mental delusions, right? And this is why, and so with this, then we will go in the direction of aspiring for enlightenment, right? The liberation from all forms of mental delusion and mental obstructions. So to set our motivation, right? So to develop this, to becoming inspired in practicing the two awakening minds. Yeah, this is the power of propelling intention, and then the power of acquaintance. This is the actual part during our meditative session when we are engaging in cultivating the two bodhicittas, right? So this is the power of acquaintance. So this is, I think, in the context of the session, right? And then the power of positive seeds. So this is more in the context of post-meditation session. So this is when we have to, as we talked about yesterday, turning unconditional conditions. Is that right? No, unfavorable conditions, right? Unfavorable circumstances, unfavorable conditions onto the path of enlightenment, right? So this is when we have to try to bring our meditative sessions to life, to really test ourselves. This is the time. The post-meditation session is that time when we have to. This is when we can get a better grasp of how much progress we have made, right, during our session. So one simple thing would be to engage in the 10 virtuous actions, right? So this is the power of positive seeds. So to plant positive seeds, and to continue planting more seeds, and then also with this, then this has this added benefit of, I think, ripening seeds from the past that we have accumulated, right? So the power of positive seed. And then the fourth, the power of eradication. So here, then it's something like, I think I could say purifying negative karma. This is very much part of that, right? So here then we can do something like, let's say, prostration, but we can start that with purifying our negative, in our mind. With that mind, then making prostrations, right? So, like this, and then the power of eradication. Then in a more in the ultimate sense, then it is really about this practice. Really touches on eradicating our mental delusions, right? Mental delusions, not only in the context of purifying negative karma, but really in the context of eradicating mental delusions, and specifically self-grasping, right? Our self-grasping, right? So this is the power of eradication. Self-grasping, this is not an easy thing to do, I mean, of course, self-grasping is easy, but eradicating self-grasping is not an easy task, right? It is easy to self-grasp, but it is not so easy to realize that. And then eradicating that is even more difficult. So then one has to really look inside, look inside our mind. In the context of, I think, this practice, one really has to dwell into one's mind. There's a whole inner world. One has to look at the inner world, the inner universe, and then really look at the subtlety of our mind. Look at the various thoughts in our mind. Look at how we function, how our minds function. So like this, then we can begin like this, right? And with all this practice, then our ultimate goal is, what is our ultimate goal, right? And then this point, then I remember, Taya Jangul Rinpoche saying that our ultimate goal is not Buddhahood. Buddhahood is not our ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal is to benefit others. Is benefiting others. So this is our ultimate goal, and Buddhahood is something we aspire for, because it is very useful in benefiting others, right? It provides us it facilitates us, right? It is in a way like a facility, that state, that is really the best place from where we can then benefit others fully, So again, so this is why then dedication is so important, with the fifth power, the power of aspirational prayers. Dedication is so important. So with aspirational prayers, we recite them, and some of my friends have told me that what is really good about the aspirational prayers is that they help us, they remind us of our cause. They remind us of our goal, right? Of our aim, of our purpose, of the purpose of our practice. So in that way, then aspirational prayers have this power, right? So to always complete one virtuous action by aspirational prayers, by aspiring, by dedicating, right? So then these five practices, this is what we have to really take, from these five practices. They summarize, they summarize all the vast and the profound path that leads to Buddhahood, right? So to always engage in our practice by way of these five powers, If we do this, then this will really bring, I think, benefit, and it will be really beneficial for our practice, and also through this, then we can also benefit others better, more. We can then, I think, benefit others in a better way, more effective, right? More effective. So like this. And I remember yesterday, so I think I will stop now. And yesterday I think we had some more people who were raising hands. So I thought, yes, please, you can ask questions or share anything, and it does not need to be related to what I said now or what I said yesterday, but it can be really anything that comes to mind. So please feel free. Yeah.
So she was from yesterday, and then butterfly, you can be next.
Thank you, Rinpoche, for the teaching. Okay, I have 2 questions for you. Okay, the first one is, we need to know the 4 Noble Truths and be familiar with 3 principal aspects of the path. After this, right, if we were to be more systematic in understanding the Dharma, which areas do we have to move into? This is my first question.
Okay. I think you made your question was clear, and I think you also presented the answer. Yes, yes, yes. So, yes, you just said it. So the 4 Noble Truths. I think this is a very systematic approach in this is a systematic approach towards enlightenment, towards liberation, towards nirvana, right? So the first, we have to think about our present state, and then with the second, then that explains, why are we in this state, and then with the third, it is possible to be free from this state, and then with the fourth, this is how we can free ourselves from this state, right? This is one, and again with the 3 principal aspects, I think this is also very good. It picks, Rinpoche, I think really, renunciation, right? Bodhichitta, and the correct view. These 3. Renunciation, of course, when we speak about it in a very technical, technically speaking, it is not an easy thing to do, right? Renunciation, technically speaking, then it is, we define it, and when one has renounced, then it doesn't seem very hard to practice the Dharma, right? But then on the other hand, I feel this word, renunciation, it can be applied in a more liberal way. Yeah? So even, let's say, in the path that accords with the person of small capacity, that person, even though has not renounced samsara per se, has not attained renunciation per se, but one could say, even getting to that point, one has to renounce certain things. For example, one has to renounce being attached to just the pleasures of this life, right? In order to really be on the path of the person of small capacity? Mm-hmm. So, like this, I think this is very good. Then also your question, like a systematic approach, I think, so the 4 Noble Truths, this is very good, what you had said. And also maybe having gained this kind of conceptual understandings, then how do we practice in our daily lives, right? This thing, generally, when we practice, we can practice in so many ways. It would be really difficult to say we should practice in only this way. This is the right way, that is not the right way. This is very difficult to say, because what does it mean? What does it mean to practice? What does it mean, right? What does that mean? In the context of mind training, then there is that word, I think this one, in the presentation of the precepts of mind training, accomplish all yogas through a single means. This one, this point. Yeah? In the commentary it says, in this practice, unlike other practices, this does not require any sort of like dietary restrictions or special things that one person should do on top of the yoga, right? On top of the actual practice. But it is all, the practice of mind training is the single yoga, is the single means, right? So it's really in our mind. When we find ourselves in a difficult situation, this is when we have to approach, how we approach this unpleasant situation. Or when we are put in a very pleasant, when we find ourselves in a very pleasant situation, then how do we deal with that? So this is mind training. This is mind training, right? So in one way, then practice means not having so many complex things, but simply it's really about how we deal with our world. How we go on about in our daily lives, right? How we try to how we try to handle our mental delusions. Because when we find ourselves in pleasant conditions, if we do not apply mind training in those times, then when we find ourselves in an unpleasant situation, then it would be, I think, difficult to put into practice mind training, right? So it's not only unfavorable circumstances, but that also applies to favorable circumstances as well, right? So one should always be prepared in applying the antidote, in applying the antidote to whatever emotion is rising in our mind, So mind training for me has this. It is obviously it has to do with our minds and how we control that, how we control it. Because if we do not control our minds, if we let our minds go astray, then in the pivotal moment, then things go out of control, right? Because we have been too complacent with ourselves, not checking our minds, not looking at what emotions we are experiencing and what thoughts are arising, and how we become attached or we turn back from those emotions, from those experiences, right? So this is, I think, one thing. But then on the other hand, to develop a practice, right? A daily practice is again very good. Yeah? So for example, the 6 preparatory practices, this I find, with this, then I think this helps us in getting to that level, getting to a higher level. You know, when I say higher level, I mean more like training the mind directly, right? So training the mind is actually the actual part. So the preparation for that is, of course, the 6 preparatory practices, right? The 6, what is it called? The 6 preparatory practice? Excuse me? The 6 preparatory rights? Rights? Oh, thank you, thank you. Dorje Chang, something like the 6 preparatory Dharma, but then Dorje Chang. So the this, and then of course the 7 Ling is included within these 6, right? So with this, then when we follow a text, you know, that has this, and then you know, making first setting up the altar, and then cleaning the altar room, and then you know, with the prostrations, and then making supplications, you know, offering the mandala and so forth. I think then this really prepares us, you know, prepares. This helps us to prepare for the for really, I think, making the mind stronger, you know, for making the mind stronger, because it's important, I feel, that we have to use our faith in the 3 jewels, right? We have to really use our faith in the, and then bring that, and then apply that to mind training. Yeah, because so many aspects of mind training, if you look, you know, when you look at the precepts, when you look at the commitments of mind training, they can all, most of them by themselves are secular. Yeah, it seems like it's nothing uniquely Buddhist. You know, many of the commitments and the precepts there, right? So I think many people who don't have a very strong faith in the Buddha, in the Dharma and the Sangha, but when they see this, they find many aspects of mind training useful. Yeah? But for us, we already have faith. So it's important that we have to combine our faith and mind training together, you know, mind training together. So the 6 preparatory rights, I thought I knew the English term for this, but now I don't know. It, for some reason it seems very new, the term. But then this we have to really think about it, yeah. And then in the future, it will be good to develop this daily practice system. You know, to have a small booklet, and so that you can read maybe verse by verse, read one verse, and then make prostrations to one verse, and then make the mandala offerings, right? Like this. So this is then it's very good when we have a material, you know, when we can use that to guide us, right? To use as a reference point. Otherwise we say, okay, we have to do mind training, and then it becomes a little abstract, right? So I think that was what your question was, right? So definitely, yes, we have to develop such materials. Yes, and of course then make this available. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then your second question?
My second question is, mindfulness help us to be aware of actions which we carry out may have a detrimental effect on others. Okay, being Buddhist, we take on the 5 precepts, and we are all humans. So I believe at some point of time, we'll violate some of the precepts. So how do we right the wrong?
When we commit these transgressions, then we have to, I think, first develop regret, develop regret. Regret is important in the context of purifying, purifying negative karma, right? Regret is a good thing, but then some people, they might they might really focus on regretting too much, I feel, right? And then this, of course, then it becomes guilt, right? Guilt. So I don't think that is good, right? Yes, it is important to recognize that we had made a mistake. This is important, and having regret, this is good. But then we have to purify, right? We have to purify. So as we say, purifying by way of the 4 opponent powers. Yeah, by way of the 4 opponent powers, like this. In the case of like bodhisattva vows, then I think when we take the next time, then there's that point where we have to, if there has been transgressions, then when we take it the second time, then to think that taking the bodhisattva, that commitment the second time, with that then we what's the word? Excuse me? Yes, we renew our vows, nyamba surchu. Yeah, that it has now been nyamba surchu. Yes, so like this. Right the wrong. This is good. I think, yeah, once we have committed a negative action, we have committed a transgression. Of course, we cannot go back in time and then do it all over again. We cannot, right? So by developing regret, and then I think also the second wish, which is to not repeat the same mistake. Again, this is very important. And then with a firm commitment, with a firm pledge, with a firm mind, then I think retaking the vows is okay. Yeah. So like this. Okay. Yes.
Hi Rinpoche, I have some question regarding on the text. It says in the text, integrate all the teaching into one thoughts. What is this one thoughts? And what is this one thoughts?
One thought.
Yeah, it says in the text,
Mhm.
integrate all the teaching into one thoughts. Then it follows primarily importance should be given to the two witnesses.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
right.
and also what is the two witnesses?
Oh, okay. The intent of all teachings converges on a single point of the two witnesses uphold the principal one, right? Is this the one? Or maybe this is the other translation that I was
Yeah,
reading.
the other.
Okay,
That's right.
okay. Integrate all the teachings into one thought.
Yes.
Primarily, importance should be given to the two witnesses. Okay, okay. So integrate all the teachings into one thought. This is how it is explained here. In Geshe Tubden Jimba's translation, it says, the intent of all teachings converges on a single point. These two translations, I think, they convey a different meaning, it seems like, right? Integrate all the teachings into one thought versus the intent of all teachings converges on a single point. Somehow, it looks like different, almost like different words there, right? But anyhow, integrate all the teachings into one thought. Okay. So this is how it is, I think. That what is this one thought? This one thought is recognizing, right? It's recognizing that all the teachings that the Buddha gave was for the purpose of overcoming our negativity, our obscurations, the obscurations of sentient beings. So this is the one thought that is being referred to here. So just as in the translation by Tubden Jimba, the intent of all teachings converges on a single point. Again, similar here, right? The great teacher's intent, he gave many, we say 84,000 volumes, the profound and the vast teachings of the Buddhas. All of those teachings, ultimately they were all given for one purpose, and that purpose is for the benefit of sentient beings, right? It was given, his intent was so that we can be free from the source of suffering, right? So that we can be free from our mental delusions, from our mental obscurations. So this is the single point. This is the single point, and recognizing that is that one thought, right? Okay, and then the second line, primarily importance should be given to the two witnesses. This is the translation by Brian Beresford. And then in Geshe Tubden Jimba's translation, let us see, of the two witnesses, uphold the principal one. Here, I think it seems those translations convey very different meanings, right? In the first, primary importance should be given to the two witnesses. The two witnesses is the other and oneself, right? Others are our witnesses, and we are our witnesses. let us say, for example, by engaging in the mind training practice, yeah, if we try to make some effort sincerely, with dedication, then those around us will sense a change in us, right? They notice that we have somehow changed for the better, right? And then they will say, oh, this person, he has changed, right? And so on and so forth, right? So this is one witness, and the other witness is ourselves. We know how much progress we have made. Only we can judge. Ultimately, only we can have a sense of how much progress we have made in our practice, right? So of these two witnesses, then uphold the principal one, look to ourselves, and then whether we can see any changes in our practice, in our way of thinking, in how we relate to others, in how we handle difficult situations. Only we can be the judge of our actions and our thoughts and our intentions. Only we truly know our deepest aspirations, right? So, of the two witnesses, uphold the principal one, right? Uphold the principal one. Okay.
Okay. In the text, it also says, transform your attitude. This attitude, right? What does this attitude refer to? And it's continued by saying, but maintain your natural behavior. So, how to do it, and what does it really mean?
Transform the attitude, but remain as you are. Yeah. So, I think here the message is that as we engage in this wonderful practice, it is important that the changes really take place in our mind, in our thoughts, in how we view ourselves, in how we view others, how we view our relation with others, right? So this is our attitude. This is our view. So mind training, the purpose of mind training is that we have to bring about this positive change, right? We have to change our rigid way of thinking, our narrow-minded approach. We have to change that, right? But it is important that we should not become ostentatious in doing that, in making a big show out of our practice, right? So to remain as we are, right? To not make our mind training ostentatious, to not create a big scene, not make a big show out of that, but really the changes should occur in our thoughts, in our motivation, in our mind, right? So this is, I think, the meaning of this line. Yeah.
One last question.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. we usually chant in, because it's pertaining to this question. So we usually chant in the train, in the bus. So it's very awkward, you know, when we hold the mala or when we like mumble, and then people will think this fella is, we all Singaporeans say xiao. Crazy.
笑
So I would like to request or ask Rinpoche to teach us how to do meditation on giving and taking.
on giving and
Yeah, so
taking.
that we don't look so xiao.
Yes. A few days back, I was walking, and then there were many people on the trail who seemed they were really there for exercising, right? They seemed very quite serious about it. It seemed they took their exercise quite seriously, but there were a few Indians, and they were carrying mala and reciting loudly. There was even one Indian couple, both of them had earphones, and as they passed me, they were really chanting in this melody, in melody, right? And this is the great thing about Indians. In India, you, out of your faith, you can do so many things, and no one would think you are Sal. Yeah? Really, no one. If you, out of your belief, your religious beliefs, religious faith, you can do anything. You can even go all naked on the street, and people won't even look at you because they accept it, right? This is India, That level of diversity, I think, is really, I think one could say it's unique to India. Acceptance in that way, right? Accepting different traditions, different ways of displaying one's faith, one's beliefs. It's really wonderful. Okay, but the reality is that we are not in India here, so we have to then, I guess, stick to social conventions and play along with this, go along the lines of how people conform to the norms, the social norms. Again, this is important, right? So, when your question was then, did you say the practice of giving and taking? The practice of giving and taking is essentially the practice of cultivating compassion and love. Is essentially that practice. We have to do this by way of visualizing, right? By way of visualization, So visualizing the mother, visualizing mother sentient beings, and then visualizing taking their suffering, their mental obscurations and so forth onto you, and then as you breathe out, then giving one's possessions, one's body, one's seeds of virtue, all positive qualities one has, giving those to mother sentient beings, right? And we use our breathing in and breathing out, so that in a way we try to synchronize this practice of giving and taking, this visualization, with our breathing, right? It's essentially that, right? And then as it says in as it says here, in all actions, train by means of the words. So in the Lama Chopa, there's this one verse on Tonglen, on Tonglen. So that verse is really powerful. When you recite that and make this, when you recite it loudly, then it has a certain effect on our mind. When you recite the words of great masters, when we try to recite the words that they have composed, that they have worded in a certain way, these teachings, the content of those words, the feeling that they convey, this is really powerful, right? So I think reciting those words like this, then we can practice giving and taking, by as we recite those words. As we recite those words, we can then think like this. But when we are on the train, if we can practice the practice of giving and taking, that's good, right? But then on the train, what I find useful is just to look around. I find that useful to look at people and then trying to get a grasp, trying to get a grasp. You can look around and you can see the behavior, their behavior, what are going on in their mind, what's going on in their minds, as through their behaviors, you can observe. I think this is very good. But then if it is a long journey and you have some time, then I think you can, of course, engage in this and think about the people around you, and then trying to take their suffering there, right? So this is something that I think we can all do. We can all do. So is it really true that if you're in the train and you start, you start reciting, you get your mala out, then people think you are strange? Uh-huh. Oh, right, right. Oh, right, right. Yes, yes. But then we can sort of maybe think out of the box and then say, well, so what, right? So what if they think I'm crazy, right? So what, Would I really ruin their day if I mumble along, Maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe people have to be exposed to different things to accept, Because if we always conform to just one way of thinking and like this, then there's the danger that I think we might become very, what's the word? Maybe the society might be a little bland, might become a little bland, But anyhow, this, yeah. So the choice is really ours, what we can do, what would be appropriate, of course. You're right. So okay, like this, yeah. But the 7-point mind training, this time it's something just like an introduction, but in the future I want to go more into this, more into this. I don't feel I've done justice here with the past 3 days. On this, definitely, I want to go more in depth, and then, also not only just talking and interacting, but also I think it would be a good thing to also have meditation session in between. I think this would be good. This would be good. So otherwise, sometimes I think then, there's a danger that this becomes too narrative. Too narrative. So having and then meditating as a group, I think it has its own benefits, meditating as a group. Of course, many of us, we try to meditate in solitude, but as a group, I think this is also important, to meditate together, right? So going through some points and then meditating, digesting that, right? So like this, definitely we have to go more in depth. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah.
So the next question will be Ling, and we actually have 4 more questions in line. So just to let everyone know, to be transparent. Okay, Ling.
Rinpoche, I have same questions continue from Cindy portion on the giving and taking. My question is actually in comparison, it may be easier to give as versus taking. So I may give everything out, but taking suffering on is a challenge of others. So after I've taken on, in this practice of my training, if I've taken on the suffering of others, what do I do with this suffering that is now come to me? That's question number 1, how to deal with this within myself. And my own personal suffering, which I'm suffering now, it could be illnesses, family problem, financial problem. How do I deal with this suffering? The main question to lead to this is, what is the purpose of this outcome of taking? What does it want to do to my mind in this taking? The outcome.
the first, when we take the suffering of others onto us, I think it would be a good thing to take on the suffering, and after that, then what do we do with all that suffering, right? What do we do now with all those sufferings? Then here, it's important, I think, that we dissolve all the sufferings that we have taken into emptiness, so into our Buddha nature, right? This is one thing. And then, of course, from the Buddha nature, then arises all good qualities, all virtuous qualities, and then we share that with others, right? So back and forth, okay? And then the second part, taking on the sufferings of others is one thing, but then what do we do with the sufferings that we already have, right? Was that the question? Okay. Dealing with suffering, with any unfortunate circumstances that we find ourselves in, is really one of the most important ways of practicing the Dharma. If we do not link the practice of Dharma to our problems, to our issues, then it is limited, right? Our practice of the Dharma is somewhat limited. So, what does the Dharma teaches us? What it teaches us is, despite suffering being our nature, suffering isn't limited to one man or one woman or just to humanity, but it is pervasive. Suffering itself is pervasive. Yeah, this is number one. So, what is the way out of this suffering, right? Then, this is where we have to this point, then I want to talk a bit about karma. How, in the texts, our teachers, they all say, whatever misery befalls on us is due to our past karma. It's all due to our past action, right? This is one thing. And then, when we go through difficult periods, as the Kadamba Geshes would say, that each of those difficult periods, when we go through difficult experiences, they view these difficult experiences as a form of purification, as a form of purifying past negative karma. When we suffer, it is important that we do not blame, that we do not banish the blame onto others. It's important that we have to say that I am going through this because of my past karma, because of this life's karma, because of my actions in this life and my actions in previous lives. This is very important. But in the context of cultivating compassion, we never say other sentient beings suffer because of their past karma. We don't say that. If we think like this, it is not useful. But when we suffer, we don't say, I am suffering because of that person. We never say that. Because if we think like this isn't useful, right? So we, in a way, blame it onto our past lives. We are outsourcing the blame onto our not someone else here, but to a person who has ceased to exist, but is very much alive now. It's you, right? It's us, right? So within that, there is sort of like a liberation. It frees us from holding someone responsible for our misery, for our suffering, right? So this is very healing. Within that, there is this healing process there. So like this, and then using the Dharma again to really make the best use of our time. We all have we all have our own lives, our own situations, our own challenges, and so forth. But so suffering is the common denominator, is that right? And then Dharma is one solution that we can use, we can rely on the techniques that the Buddha taught, that contained in the Dharma, to really approach our situation in the best way. This is, I think, very important, because due to past karmas, we find ourselves in various different circumstances. Even we might think, oh, such and such person is in a much better place than me, right? But then the question is that really the case? Doesn't that person also have his or her own problems, right? So we are all equal that way. We are all equal in the way that we are suffering in various ways. If you look at the 8, the 6, the 3 sufferings that are explained in the scriptures, none of us are free from any of those forms of suffering. It is not as if one person has to only go through number 1 and 3, but is free from number 2 and the rest. It's not like that, We are all equally suffering. It's just that maybe we might only see one aspect and then compare ourselves, right? And then think, oh, I'm in a much better place, or I'm in a much worse place. We might think like this. But what is really important here is, what I find good is when it comes to some things, then generalizing is very good. It really has this a benefit of equalizing, equalizing everyone. Yeah? So, in this way, then generalization is not a bad thing. Yeah? And then to look at Dharma, how is that a medicine? How does it heal? If the Dharma doesn't help us heal, then why call it a medicine, right? Why liken it to a medicine? So, how can we use the Dharma to heal us? To heal our minds. So this is really a big challenge. It's really a challenge in linking the Dharma in that way. In that way. But we have to try. We have to try. We have to try different methods. We always have to analyze and then look at the different theories and put those theories into test, into practice. We have to try and not stop, and not stop. This is, I think, very important, very important. And then the third question was the outcome of taking.
The outcome of taking. What do you want to do? The healing portion. To heal what? After taking is to heal what?
Heal what?
Yes, what?
Oh,
yes.
all right.
The outcome.
So here, the practice of giving and taking, when we do this visualization, this visual meditation, what is the outcome of that practice, right? I think at least for the foreseeable future, or should I say the foreseeable outcome, is in the case of the practice of taking on the suffering of others, is becoming more compassionate towards other. That is the near outcome, And the same thing for giving, for the practice of giving, then the outcome is becoming more loving to others, developing warm-heartedness, kind-heartedness. This is really the outcome of this practice, This is what is meant to be the outcome, So it seems the outcome isn't something like, the outcome of the practice of taking is so that people don't have their suffering anymore. It's not like that, right? But the outcome should be really to bring about a change within us. This should be the outcome, right? As we say, as our teachers say, as it is mentioned in the text, without subduing our minds, how can we subdue others, right? Without having peace yourself, how can you bring about peace in others? So the outcome is definitely, developing. Even though we already, have the basis for unconditional compassion, unconditional love, yet our base is somewhat limited, right? With all these thoughts, all these somewhat idealistic thoughts in our minds, these false thoughts are holding us back, But we have the basis. We have the basis for developing love and compassion, infinite compassion, great compassion, unconditional love. We have the basis, right? We all do, because we have been brought up with this love and compassion, by our mothers, by our parents, by our grandparents, and so forth. So we have the seeds for that, right? But now we really have to develop them even further, even further, to the point that we are able to include everyone, to the point that we are able to include everyone. So to the point that if any sentient being were to approach us for help, we will always extend our kindness. We will never turn them away, right? So we have to, I think, really, that's our goal, to reach that level. This is really the purpose, this is why one must engage in the practice of Tonglen. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Ling Chong. So the next question is from an anonymous. Dear Rinpoche, mind training is very important, but at the time of death, it is not easy to focus our mind on mind training. And also when we are sick, we have to control and practice insight despite the unpleasant emotions when we are sick. So should we still train our mind at the point of death? Or what should we do that is most beneficial?
That's a very good question. I think the most beneficial thing is to start mind training as soon as possible. And doing that and making that a part of your daily practice. Include that into your daily practice. And the more we acquaint ourselves, the more we habituate ourselves with these practice, then in the defining moments, then we are good. We can handle it, So I think like this. Just very short answer. Then next.
Yeah, Freon, you're next. And next will be Sikchen from second floor.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Rinpoche, I have a question on euthanasia on animals.
On?
Euthanasia.
Oh, euthanasia.
Yes. Okay. To have compassion is to free all sentient beings from suffering. So from the point of view of a pet owner, there may come a point in time that the animal, be a dog or a cat, that becomes very severely ill. And the vet, may advise that, because it is already no point to hold on and the animal is suffering. And so euthanasia may be the so-called option out from the point of view of the vet. But as a Dharma practitioner, this will be a very tricky situation. Because if we are thinking of, we do not want to commit killing directly or indirectly, this will not be a good option to choose. Yeah, but by doing so, we'll be inflicting harm to the animal. So what will be a best way out, to handle situations like this? And last part of the question is, if supposedly such an action has been done or decision has been made, what can the pet owner do? I mean, prayers or rituals to help the animal that has been put down. And also, as a pet owner, what are the efforts that can be done in order to reduce the effect of the negative actions on one's karma? Thank you, Rinpoche.
The first part, this is the most challenging question. So it's really on the one hand to not kill. You have that precept. On the other hand, to practice compassion, to practice love, and trying to alleviate suffering as much as you can, alleviating the suffering of others as much as you can. This is, I think, one of the commitments of those who are aspiring the Bodhisattva's way of life. So these two things, how do you balance that, right? As we say, in the Buddha's Hinayana teachings, then there are no compromises when it comes to the subject of not killing. In the Bodhisattva teachings, then we have these stories where a Bodhisattva kills in order to save more human beings, more sentient beings. We have those stories as well. So then, what do you do here? Also as a pet owner, I can speak as well. Many few years back, one of our dogs, had this sickness, and it was so clear that the dog, that there's no way that the dog can be cured of this. And the vet came, and we tried many treatments, but nothing worked. And if we let the dog live, then there was so much suffering, right? So much suffering. And that was certain, So we had to euthanize the dog, right? So this is what we did. That was the only time that that I had to euthanize a pet, right? Only just one time. So the choice is yours, right? So you have to choose between these two, right? Between these two. Okay. And then the second was, what can we do for the
What effort can we make in order to help the animal that has been put down? And also as a pet owner, what are the rituals or prayers that we can try to make an effort to reduce the karma because of this negative action?
I think, something like saying the Vajrasattva mantra, or doing Lama Chöpa for the pet, for the pet that was euthanized, doing Lama Chöpa like this, the Guru Puja like this, I think would be good. Yes. So Guru Puja, this is what we do when a person dies, doing the Guru Puja, right? So I think likewise, even for pets, animals, when they die, we can also do Guru Puja and then dedicate for their good rebirth and so forth, like this. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer, Sikchen.
Okay, good afternoon, Rinpoche. Thank you so much for your teachings these past days. As a practitioner of Tonglam, I've been trying it casually for the past few years. And I would say that it's a very, very strong, very, very powerful practice, especially when we are sick. This is in response to Ling who talk about, when we are sick and all that, what can we do? And I think that as a kind of self-care, Tonglam for ourselves is extremely powerful. I usually practice it when I'm sick, like I have a very bad tummy ache, or when I'm feeling financially very strained. So I visualize as black smoke, all these, let's say stomach ache, all the aches that's ripening in me, and I feel the stomach ache, so it ripens in myself, and then I will give the kind of sense of relief as white smoke to all beings who suffer. So I find that it's very helpful for me, as it helps to lessen my pain. But I think this kind of practice is kind of like only at one level. I was thinking like upgrading, to Tonglam 1.1, because that was like Tonglam 1.0. I was at 1.1 to eradicate perhaps something else, right? A lot more entrenching. So I was thinking like, as I visualize the black smoke coming into me, as I take on the suffering of others, it ripens in me as pain. But at the same time, I was thinking like using that notion of black smoke to also attack my own self-grasping mind. So what do you think of that? Do you think that will be a useful practice?
Yes, so I think this is still in beta form, right? Is it beta? Beta?
Yes, beta.
B-E-T-A? Beta. So then, of course, because it's in beta form, that it has to be tested. So there might be some bugs here and there, but I think this seems plausible. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Rinpoche, there is another question from an anonymous. A Dharma practitioner avoids her own parent because she feels that every time after meeting the parents, some unfortunate incidents will happen. For example, the car will break down, someone in the family will fall sick, and then the business deal that's almost nearing completion will suddenly have problems. So, dear Rinpoche, what is your advice to this practitioner who is actually very enthusiastic and prompt in learning the Dharma?
How about seeing those situations as coincidental, right, and not linking? Well, did I understand the question correctly? That after meeting the parents, then some unfortunate thing would happen, right? Like the car breaking down. Now I don't know how we can link the car breaking down to meeting our parents. This is the mysterious part for me. But then we have to say, am I on good terms with my parents? This is the question that we can answer ourselves. And if you cannot answer in the affirmative, if it is not a yes, then we have to find out what's wrong. You have to find out what's wrong. This is important. I think this is the more important. This is more important. Your relationship with your parents is more important than the car breaking down. If the car breaks down, you can fix that easily. Provided that, of course, you have a good mechanic, right? But if the relationship with the parents break down, then then you are the mechanic. You are the mechanic. So you have to think carefully, and whenever there is some kind of disagreement, what I find very useful is that if I disagree with someone, then I like to share some of the blame, to not say the other person is entirely responsible, to not point the fingers at the other party, but also to recognize that you also are in a way perpetuating, right? Perpetuating this, and also that you had also contributed in the breakdown of this relationship. I think this is important, because if you always address this kind of difficult situations, if you always approach these situations as if we ourselves are entirely what is the word? As if we are not responsible for anything, right? As if we are completely that we have no faults at all, right? That we are perfect, and it's really the other person who is making all the mistakes. If we approach it like this, then I would have to say this would be very difficult. This would be very difficult. Then one is definitely making things more difficult, for oneself. So one really has to then have a very open conversation, and really, really accept, one has to accept responsibility. I think this is very important in this type of human relations. This is very important. To always being, if you are willing to accept that you may have made a mistake, then this is really one of the greatest strengths. This will be a great strength. So like this. Okay. So then I think, okay, now we have to dedicate. So I think for the past 3 days, because of my limitations, then I could only sort of go on the surface, just touch on the surface. But in the future, of course, I would like to, deepen my understanding, and of course, then the practice, the application aspect as well, and then go with you in more great depth. So then, that way, then this can be of some use, right? So now, whatever virtues that we have, that we may have accumulated, then let us all dedicate this for all mother sentient beings, towards their attaining freedom from suffering. So please.